Tonight, the Chancellor under pressure, days out from her spring statement. Her options over the public finances are stark. Rachel Reeves faces a choice between tax hikes or spending cuts, with the welfare budget under the knife. The boss of Heathrow summoned to face MPs after the National Grid says the airport did have enough power to avoid a shutdown, and airlines threatened to sue. Also tonight, the eldest son of Giselle Pelicot relives the moment his mother told him about the sexual abuse she suffered at the hands of his father.
He was my father, but he's not anymore. Today, he's a monster.
And English councils will be ranked according to how well they fix potholes, with those who fail to publish updates losing out on millions in funding. Taking first spot in our own rankings today, Guto Harri and Kwajo Tweneboa. He'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. I don't want to exaggerate, but look, in this instance, I don't think I am exaggerating to say that this could be a make or break week for Rachel Reeves. On Wednesday, she will deliver her spring statement, a chance to be defined by something other than the controversial autumn budget. And it's also a chance to try and box herself out of the corner that she finds herself in, because the economic and the fiscal position right now is a very tight corner indeed. So she's got three choices: cut spending, raise taxes, or break her fiscal rules. And we already know, really, what choice she's going to go for.
I am absolutely convinced we can get better value for money for all of the taxes that are paid into the system.
I'll translate for you. That means cuts. Cuts to the civil service, cuts to the benefits bill, cuts also to unprotected departments: justice, transport, local government. I've been thinking a lot about an interview I did with the former chief economist at the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, and I've been thinking about it because he was worried about exactly this.
I think it would be deeply counterproductive to both growth and to the fiscal position, Sophie, if that led to a cutting back on investment and indeed in spending more generally. Then I think you really are into a doom loop between debt and growth, and that's the situation to avoid at all costs.
So cutting spending would lead to a doom loop. I mean, I guess the government would say efficiency and value for money is a good thing. Taxpayers want their money to be spent carefully. And also, what choice do they have? You know, they won an election on a platform of fiscal responsibility, and taxes are already at a record high. That's not the view, though, of the former Bank of England Governor, Lord Mervyn King.
But in the long run, to raise enough money, I think we will have to raise the basic rate of income tax. And I see no harm in doing that, provided, and this is the clear condition on it, it's being used to finance a well-thought-through programme of spending and reform. So
the reform first, otherwise you're just shoveling in the money
plan
that
for
would be
reform
wasted.
First,
yeah.
And then slowly raise the tax to finance it.
So what Mervyn King is saying is that people are willing to pay higher taxes if, and it's a big if, they understand why. So it's not just going into the black hole of debt and public spending for no result. Labour needs to tell a story. And look, I'll be honest, maybe that is the big issue that this government has. What is their story? What is their driving mission? So maybe this week will be make or break, not just for Rachel Reeves, but for Keir Starmer as well, because it's a chance to set out that story. But the question is, are they going to take it?
Wednesday, the day the Chancellor's got to get the public finances back on track. And here's Rachel Reeves' problem in a nutshell. She set herself very tight borrowing limits. By 2029, day-to-day government spending must be funded entirely by taxes and not at all by borrowing, which we haven't achieved, you can see all this borrowing above the line, in decades. Back when she set this target in October, her own watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, found she was only going to succeed by the slimmest of margins, a touch under £10 billion. But since last October, growth, look at this, is down 2% to 1%. Borrowing is up to £151 billion. All of this means her headroom is wiped out and she misses her own target. So she's got to find immediate savings across government to replace it. So what's she going to do? Well, actually, we've got a pretty good idea because of these two. Budget-type events used to be state secrets, But after their mini-budget, the Treasury doesn't like surprises anymore. So we think Rachel Reeves has to fill a black hole of about £10 billion. It might be a touch more. And she cannot break her borrowing promises, and she needs to restore the headroom to at least what it is at the moment. So this requires the following immediate action. We heard some of it last week, squeezing welfare spending, cuts to disability payments. Then there's squeezes to future government spending. Rachel Reeves says this means efficiencies and civil service cuts, but no return to austerity. We'll see. And then, finally, there's a technical accounting change. A month ago, Keir Starmer increased defence spending by squeezing aid spending. Because of an accounting anomaly, this helps the Chancellor to the tune of billions. Now, the big call on Wednesday will be how much to squeeze future public spending levels. But look back over spending settlements of the last 30 years. It's not going to be easy. Rises of 2, 3, 4, even 5% almost, all the time apart from the post-2010 austerity years of the coalition. But look at this, decent increases last year, this year. But after 2026, Rachel Reeves was plotting increases of just 1.3%. But on Wednesday, this could drop to 1.2 or 1.1%. And with areas like health protected, some government departments could see real terms cuts. Is it austerity light? Then there's welfare. We are told that Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall saved Rachel Reeves £5 billion last week. But we only found out where the savings come from precisely on Wednesday in an impact assessment that gets published on the same day as the spring statement. Which disabled people lose out the most? That could be a major flashpoint. Rachel Reeves will say the world has changed, although she's stuck to the same borrowing rules and tax promises as the autumn. The big question is whether this level of tax and spend overall is sustainable in the long term, or whether, come the autumn, if growth still hasn't arrived, the next budget brings yet more tax hikes.
Well, let's chat a bit more, shall we, about the upcoming spring statement. It's double trouble for us tonight. We've got not only Sam Coates, but we've also got Ed Conway, our economics editor, as well. Ed, talk to us about the situation that Rachel Reeves is in this week.
Wasn't that a great screen, by the way? It was fascinating. Great charts. It was...
Come on, get a room, you two. What's going on? Blimey.
I think, you know, as Sam was saying, like, part of the issue here is you've got this... We've been talking a lot about this headroom. You know, everything comes back in the end to this question of just how much room, you know, Rachel Reeves has been left with after the OBR's latest kind of forecasts. But it's worth just remembering, what is headroom? I mean, all headroom is saying this is how much room you've got against your own self-imposed fiscal rules. It's not like there's some, you know, kind of gospel truth about how much room you have to spend in the future. It is their own fiscal rules. And I mean, we can have a long conversation about whether they are good or bad rules, but nonetheless, that's kind of where things begin. And so it's kind of, how is she being marked against her own kind of yardsticks? And the answer is not very well, because she didn't leave enough space in the time of the last budget, and this time, you know, it's awkward. And this wasn't supposed to be a big moment, but the economy isn't doing as well. Interest rates are a lot higher, and as a result of those two things together, basically, that little room that she left against those fiscal rules has been eroded away. But as I say, it is a kind of self-imposed issue. You know, she could have chosen different fiscal rules. She could have left herself more room in the last budget. As it is, she basically doesn't have much room to play with. And I think we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be talking about the state of the economy, which is the big thing. But the bigger picture, and it's just, you know, it's hard to express this in any way, is just there is this momentous shadow of what's going on in the global economy right now. And it's hard to imagine how anything we're going to hear about this week is going to kind of be, you know, be even with that, given you've got potential trade war, what's happening in Ukraine right now. That's the big stuff that we're going to be talking about for much longer, I imagine, than this week.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. But I guess that also sets a weather, as you say, doesn't it, for what the government does and the decisions it makes. Sam, what do you think we can expect?
Well, I think number 10 probably have a fairly clear way of judging whether or not Wednesday is a success. And I mean, I'd summarise it like this. If on Thursday night you are watching Ed leading the coverage, that is a win for Downing Street. And if you are watching me leading the coverage, that's a lose for Downing Street. What
because they like Ed more than you, so
that's a win for everyone. That's definitely true. But let me explain what I mean. Number 10 is hoping that this spring statement does not have an enormous shelf life in news terms. They know it's an incredibly difficult moment for Rachel Reeves for all the reasons that Ed just set out. And they sort of want it to die a news cycle death as quickly as possible. There are even stories in the Grid on Thursday and Friday about growth designed to kind of dampen any lasting news discomfort if the conversation about growth is still going on. If it's a boring economic story on Thursday night...
Ed, are you going to have this?
Never be boring.
And then it'll be a win.
You know.
However, other things are going on aside from the Office for Budget Responsibility report and the emergency action that Rachel Reeves has to take, particularly about welfare. We get the specifics about those disability cuts on Wednesday as well. Some might think that those numbers have almost been buried beneath the spring statement. We get to find out whether the reports at the weekend are true, that some people will lose from £15,000 a year to £5,000 a year, potentially enormous sums. We don't really know at the moment because we've only had some of the data and not all of it. And there is a real fear that the rebellion around that and the opposition to the whole government's approach on this could come unstuck after Wednesday. And that is the fear at a point where, as Ed says, there are lots of other worries here, but the government's having to throw all sorts of things at the wall to see if they stick, not least to avoid Britain being caught up in a trade war. Let me give you one example. The government, on the record this weekend, has started talking about whether or not it kind of waters down or abandons altogether a digital service tax. In other words, as we take £5 billion away from disabled people, at the same time, we might be giving a £1 billion tax break to some of the biggest global social media companies that generate enormous profits. And that kind of discussion, as it goes through, has the potential to really inflame Labour MPs. All the choices here invidious, but watch out. Is it Ed or is it me? That's the big thing that Downing Street will be watching out for.
Is it an economic story or a political one?
Well, that's another way of putting it.
Great to have you both here. Looking forward to getting more from you throughout the week as well. It's going to be a big story, whatever happens. But ahead of Wednesday's spring statement, Ed Conway and Sky's political editor Beth Rigby have condensed their take on the challenges facing the Chancellor in less than a minute.
It's spring statement time.
Where the Chancellor gives us her update on the state of the economy.
We've got to tell you the main things we're looking out for. We're only allowed one thing. Ed, what's your one big thought?
But we've got to do it in 45 seconds.
Yes. That's we're going to do it.
And each of us is going to time the other.
So you have got to give your one big thought. I'm going to start you now.
OK, so there's way more than one thing going on here. Actually, there's a lot of things going on at the same time. This wasn't supposed to be a big fiscal event. You know, it was supposed to be basically nothing. But there's lots happening. You've got Donald Trump on the other side of the Atlantic, a potential trade war. That stuff is massively consequential. What happens in Ukraine? What happens with Russia? That's big. That's big. But if I was going to choose one thing on the spring statement, it is, how is the economy doing? So we get the latest update from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Last time around, they were saying 2% growth this year. Instead, it looks like it's more going to be like about kind of 1%. The upshot of that is you have less headroom to play with. And as a result of having less headroom to play with, against these fiscal rules, which should they exist, you potentially have to have lots of spending cuts, and that could be painful in the future, couldn't it? Bang.
Nailed it. Pressure on.
So you'll go back.
OK.
Ready, steady, go.
So as Ed was saying, there is going to be an economic update and it's going to be pretty bleak for the Chancellor, who has ruled out any tax rises. This is not a fiscal event. She's also ruled out changing her fiscal rules and borrowing more. So what does she do? She has to have spending cuts. We've already seen £5 billion of welfare cuts announced. On Wednesday, you're going to get the detail about where the axe will fall. So it's going to be quite a difficult day for hundreds of thousands of people that might now get more of a sense about whether they're losing their benefits. But it's not just welfare, that's just the start. She's got to find billions of more of savings, so tens of thousands of civil service jobs could go, efficiency across government, but also deeper cuts further down the line for unprotected departments, be it the Home Office, health, the courts. I haven't finished.
Yeah, no, but it's over.
It's over. Yeah. OK, so just to round off, so it's going to be a pretty difficult day for her. I think the Chancellor will say it's all about reform and efficiency and making the state spend taxpayers' money more. I think the unions could be calling out... I'm literally finishing my thought. The unions might shout out austerity, which the government will not like at all, will they?
It's like it was way over time.
I know, but...
Anyway,
if you want to see
you agree
more of
with
this,
that,
no,
though?
I agree. It was good analysis. Could have been a little bit more concise, but nonetheless, we will be on air through the day with all the analysis, all the kind of. I'll have some charts. We'll be talking to some of the big numbers, as big cheeses as well.
Yeah.
Giving you a sense of how big of a deal this is.
Wednesday from 11 a.m. Don't miss it.
Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Downing Street Director of Communications, Guto Harri, and the social issues campaigner, Kwajo Tweneboa. Great to have you both here. We've really gone in here, on the spring statement. Big week, lots to talk about, and difficult picture ahead for Rachel Reeves, certainly. Kwajo, what's your reaction to some of what's been trailed? I mean, we know that we don't know exactly the details or the impact, but we know that there are going to be big changes to benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when people voted for or promised change at the last election, steamrolling over the country's most vulnerable, including those with disabilities, those unable to work, and those struggling with their mental health, wasn't the change I don't believe the majority of the country believed they were voting for, but seems to be happening. What the government isn't speaking about, though, is the real incentive to get into work and stay in work, and that is pay. And what we do know is real wages in 2025 is less than what it was in 2008. We also know we've got over 7 million people in work at the moment, living in a state of poverty, hand to mouth, and 3 million women who aren't even earning the living wage at the moment. Now, if government don't focus on that, what that means, or what that could mean, especially if the costs of goods and services continue to increase, is that further along the line, people that are currently working now may have to turn to the welfare and depend on them, further increasing the current bill. I think that's what they should be focusing on instead of scapegoating the country's most vulnerable, which is what we see time and time again by governments.
Can I be honest? You are someone who usually come on these programmes and you're quite measured. You try not to kind of take a big stride, be too strident on things. But it feels like you're really angry about this.
I think it's absolutely infuriating because it's going to push more and more people that are already in a state of poverty, further into poverty, and is counterproductive because what they really should be focusing on is that real incentive, as I mentioned, to get people into work and stay in work, and that is wages, not attacking those who aren't able to work, those that are disabled and those struggling with their mental health. And I think there'll be many people within the Labour Party and many Labour voters up and down the country who would be furious that this is happening, instead of them, again, focusing on the long-term solution to getting people into work, but making sure people also, through work, are living or have a decent standard of living.
Guto, what's your take on this?
Well, you can pay people more when your company's doing well, when the economy's doing well, when there's growth in the economy. And there's no growth in the economy at the moment. And, there's lots of complex reasons for that. But a lot of us think that Rachel Reeves actively discouraged growth and destroyed growth by talking down the economy for months when they came in, by imposing the VAT increase, the national insurance increase. It's not even kicked in yet. This is how bad it is. The economy is slowing down. Inflation is up. Debt is the thing we spend almost as much on as we do welfare. We spend more on those two things than we do on anything like long-term infrastructure, like education, like job creation, like all the things that will make Britain a better place down the line. It's a dire place. National insurance kicks in next week. If companies are feeling hard up now, imagine what they will feel like when they start looking at their payroll. It's really grim. And then if we have a trade war, there'll be a trade war, whether we're in it or on the fringes of it. It's really rough. And Rachel Reeves, the decisions politically, as we just heard, are pretty unattractive for her. Nobody's going to cheer the decisions if they have to be done. And her own side is going to absolutely hate it. So it's a big moment.
Do you think there's going to be much rebellion, much unhappiness on the Labour benches then this week?
Well, if it's going down the route we think it's going to go down, then I would hope so, because, again, many people up and down the country didn't think this was the change they were going to vote for and are going to depend on Labour members, their MPs, to actually speak out if they believe it is wrong. I mean, my worry is that for some people, it could ultimately cost their lives.
Yeah, because they're pushed to the brink, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, people are struggling as it is, and we're pushing people, like I mentioned earlier, who are already in poverty further into a state of poverty. And also, when we talk about that long term, yes, they may save £5 billion, but what's the cost going to be on the NHS, on mental health services, if they do go down this route?
There are some things that this government is responsible for, but there is a lot of things that they're not responsible for, right? I mean, you touched on some of them before, looking at what's happening across the globe, looking at trade wars, even if we're not directly involved in them, that has an impact on us. And I guess Labour would also say the state that the Conservatives left the country in, low growth, yes, they claim to be the fastest growing economy, but we all know that, growth has been sluggish for, a long time, high levels of national debt, an awful lot of people on welfare, particularly on disability benefit. It's not all their fault, is it?
No. There's a global pandemic that hit, the whole world for 6, and that took a big effort to clear up. There's a war in Europe that hit energy prices. So there's lots of reasons for this. But, Jeremy Hunt, as Chancellor, helped bring inflation down from 11%, which is unbearably high.
Well, he's not responsible for bringing inflation down.
Brought it down to
1%. Was going down.
Well, the policies pursued brought inflation down from double digit to less than 2%.
It's that thing, though, isn't it, where you take the credit when inflation's going down, but you're not to blame when it's going up.
Well, no, because people do blame you when it goes up. But, the Conservatives, I think, now have this terrible regret that, on the watch of a number of Conservative governments, the state grew too bloated. And I remember when I was in number 10, there were 93,000 more civil servants in Whitehall than there had been pre-pandemic. We did not need another 93,000 people. And so it's not callous, it's not heartless, it's not horrible to say, let's pare that back. And, it's bold of a Labour government to say we're going to do that. Same with welfare, 300 billion. Of course, there are people who are on the breadline and there are people who are not. 300 billion is a huge amount of money. And servicing our debt costs about 100 billion. This is more than twice what we spend on defence. This is way more than we spend on education. This is way more than we are spending to generate the kind of jobs and opportunities and infrastructure that means that we don't just prop people up doing very little because the situation is so dire. They have to take bold decisions. My fear is that they talk a big game. We'll see whether they take the action. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. But the danger for Rachel Reeves is that on one side, people think she hasn't sorted out the public finances, she hasn't really grasped the nettle, and on her own side, people loathe her for doing as much as she has.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching The Politics Hub coming up. Heathrow's boss is set to be quizzed by MPs amid claims the airport did have enough power to avoid a complete shutdown. We'll have the latest on the fallout of the outage next.
The Chancellor is looking for ways to promote growth.
Today, I want to talk about economic growth.
What plans will Rachel Reeves forecast for this spring?
Our growth prospects.
And will they bloom?
To British growth for growth, driving economic growth.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Growth is the #1 mission.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Hello, welcome back. Right, let's talk Heathrow Airport now, which of course was entirely shut down on Friday after a fire at an electrical substation. But did it need to be? The head of the National Grid has suggested not, saying the airport had enough power to stay open. And now the boss of the airport has been summoned to face questions from MPs. Our business correspondent Paul Calso reports.
The great economic engine of Heathrow roared back into life at the start of a new week. The skies over West London crowded once more, 72 hours after a shutdown that raises fundamental questions about the resilience of the UK's biggest transport hub.
Heidi Alexander.
The government promising a full review.
There will, of course, be learnings to ensure we avoid such incidents from reoccurring. The review will also seek to understand any wider lessons to be learned for energy resilience for critical national infrastructure.
Facing tens of millions of pounds in compensation claims, airlines may turn to the courts to recoup their losses.
This is incredibly frustrating because Heathrow is the most expensive airport in the world. But in the near future, there will have to be an independent investigation of what happened and why recovery did take so long. And then from there, if we don't get good enough recourse and repayment in terms of the costs, then yes, there may be a case for legal action.
An investigation will focus on the catastrophic substation fire that temporarily cut power to the airport and the response of the private companies that run Heathrow and the National Grid. National Grid insists that while the fire at North Hyde cut power to Heathrow and tens of thousands of homes, 2 other substations remained online and connected to the airport. Sky News understands these are at Laleham and Iver. So it appears the issue was not power, but how fast Heathrow was able to use it.
For them to do that reconfiguration, they had to shut the airport. There's no debate over that. That is quite a big reconfiguration job that they had to go through. So right beside Heathrow, there's a new data centre. That data centre actually consumes 2-3 times as much electricity as Heathrow does. But what they have done, like every other data centre in the UK, is they've got full resilient backup that kicks in immediately.
Heathrow and the National Grid, both privately owned companies running critical national infrastructure, face questions about their resilience. The airport about why it took so long to transfer its systems to the new power sources in the grid, about how such a catastrophic fire could have started and take out its own backups on the same substation site. The official report into what went wrong will be published in May. Passenger and business confidence may take longer to repair. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, our chief political correspondent John Craig is here now. And John, what's the political fallout been from the weekend?
A national embarrassment. That's what a number of MPs said in the House of Commons today when Heidi Alexander gave a statement and then faced questions from MPs. I didn't think that Heidi Alexander was particularly confident in her replies, to be honest. She kept saying, oh, it's a private company, it's a private company. And she didn't really want to answer a lot of MPs' questions. For example, on compensation for passengers. Lots of MPs said, what does this mean about Heathrow expansion, the third runway? That's a separate issue, she said. She didn't want to go down that route. But, of course, what a lot of MPs wanted to talk about, there was John Pettigrew. Now, he is the boss of the National Grid. He, today, caused Heathrow some embarrassment by telling the Financial Times there were 2 other substations that could have provided power. Then, of course, there was Sleepy Mr Walderby, who was the...
That's his official title, is it?
He's the chief executive of Heathrow, who we learned at the weekend went to bed on Thursday night. Now, he is the boss who's been summoned by Ruth Cadbury, who chairs the Transport Select Committee. I was talking to her this evening. 9:15 next Wednesday, 2nd of April. They're going to have a session on this whole fiasco. Mr Walderby from Heathrow, probably, or quite possibly John Pettigrew from the National Grid, and probably some independent experts as well. And, of course, he's under fire for not leading from the front. Then, of course, there have been claims today that Heathrow was warned 10 years ago in a consultant's report about what was called a key weakness, the power supply. And of course... there was a claim also that the Terminal 5, which is the BA terminal, could have been up and running at lunchtime. So there's all sorts of questions. And MPs really were putting forward lots of questions, but not really getting terribly successful answers. There were questions also from MPs about customers being ripped off by the airlines. I mean, the airlines seem to be pretty furious with Heathrow as well for the way this whole thing has been handled. So... next Wednesday, we may learn some more when Mr Walderby appears before the Select Committee next Wednesday morning. OK,
I have to wait for that. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. Well, the fallout from Heathrow Airport shutdown is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor, that's Salma Shah. Right. Let's chat again to Guto and Kwajo, shall we? Guto, what's your take on all this?
I don't envy anyone who's got to make a massive call like that. Do you close the airport or not? And the safe thing to do, and I use the word advisedly, is to sort of, err on the cautious side and shut the whole thing down. But often those decisions are taken, I think, and I don't know on this particular occasion, but once somebody says the words health and safety, it kind of kills the conversation that should be weighing up actually the health and safety of people who are in planes that are turned around, the people who miss certain things, people who are flying in for operations, people who miss a wedding, people who miss their son or daughter's graduation. There's all kinds of carnage, the economic knock-on effect. And what I'm nervous about are conversations in companies as well as in governments these days where people, the moment they say health and safety, it's not... is it really that dangerous? Or are you saying we should be careful, which of course we should be at all times? And it does sound as if there might have been an overreaction on this occasion.
It's interesting. I mean, you have to, like you say, weigh up the impact it has as well. And I mean, just like speaking from my own experience, like over the weekend, like talking to people who've had to move holidays because of it, someone who had a childcare crisis because the person that they're expecting to look after their kids couldn't make it back because the plane was, cancelled. It does have a massive knock-on impact, these things, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And I was a passenger due a flight on that day, I would have been absolutely fuming. Yeah. And I think rightly so for all of those that were meant to fly out on the day. I think it seemed as though the response was chaotic. I don't think anyone would have expected a complete shutdown of Heathrow. I definitely wouldn't have expected to ever see that. And I think there's going to be many a question raised, especially why some of the other substations weren't used. But again, if I was a passenger, I would have been really, really upset on the day. Yeah. And that's what they were having to deal with at Heathrow on the day. Yeah, that's it. It's difficult, isn't it? Because you can see it from both sides. You obviously... The worst thing is if you underreact and then something really bad happens. Yeah. So you can see it from that perspective as well. But surely there's got to be some kind of
fallout from this? Like, firstly, how it could happen in the first place as well, but also
and
they
it
were
took so
listening to
long and
warnings.
it's so blanket, and you just sort of think there must be some resilience where you divert some planes or you shut down a couple of runways or however it sort of plays out. But the idea that you just shut it down en masse, and there is a culture, and we've all come across that person who enjoys the moment where he or she is the person who says, let's block the road, let's actually stop the train, and sometimes they're 100% well-intentioned, and sometimes I just think sometimes they enjoy that moment a little bit.
The power. Yeah, being the person just to really, to honestly can kind of, I can think of a couple of people
we all know them,
I do know what you mean there. Not that this is necessarily the case in Heathrow, I'm sure, absolutely. But look,
you never know.
I do get what you're saying. Thanks both very much indeed.
you.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub. The eldest son of Giselle Pelicot recounts the moment he found out about his father's crimes. We'll bring you that full, extraordinary interview up next. Hello, welcome back. Now, for David Pelicot, his mother is a heroine. He describes his father as a monster. The eldest son of Giselle Pelicot has spoken to Sky News about the moment he discovered what his father had done. Dominic Pelicot was found guilty in December of raping and drugging David's mother, Giselle, and also inviting dozens of strangers to do the same. This is an extraordinary interview from David with our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins.
It's a moment that will remain etched in my memory forever. So, on the 2nd of November, 2020, around 8:15 p.m, I was in the kitchen with my wife and children. The phone rings. I pick up the phone and it's my mum, who tells me that I have to go somewhere quiet and alone because what she's going to tell me is so unbelievable that I should be alone. And what she told me was like a tsunami, that she was abused by many men that Dominique Pelicot, her ex-husband, had invited to rape her. I felt so many emotions rising within me, and then the nausea, which had been mounting during the entire conversation, reached a peak. I hung up the phone, and it felt like the floor gave away under my feet, and I felt sick. I went to the bathroom and threw up.
The scale of abuse uncovered was mind-blowing, not just from your father, but the fact that he invited other men to rape your mother as well. How did you as a son, as the oldest son, process that?
The moment we were told that she had been abused by more than 50 men, it was very difficult to hear. This man, Dominique Pelicot, was, for me, the backbone of the family. He had taught me to respect women. And so, when I heard what he had done to our own mother, as the eldest son, I was filled with anger and total incomprehension. It's like we had left reality behind. We had gone from having a normal family life to one that had been completely erased. He was my father, but he's not anymore. Today, he's a monster.
You call your father a monster. How do you see your mother?
First and foremost, she's our mum. She's also our children's grandmother. But today, and for the rest of her life, she will be a heroine. A family's life was completely destroyed, but thanks to Gisèle Pelicot, she lifted the veil on chemical submission, so we were extremely proud throughout the trial.
Your sister is looking at her own allegations of abuse against her. How do you feel about your father's consistent denial about what she fears he did to her?
I believe that Caroline was abused by Dominique Pelicot. I say today, and I repeat, that I will be by her side in this fight.
So much loss and hurt and damage to your whole family. How do you move forward? Can you ever heal from that?
Mum is trying to rebuild herself, little by little. We have endured such unspeakable pain throughout this trial. But we must continue to live, give meaning to our lives, and not forget that in the world there are other women who cannot speak and who absolutely must be helped.
Have you heard from Dominique since he's been sentenced? Has he tried to contact you?
I'll tell you a secret. He wrote to me before the trial. But the first thing I asked myself was, why is he writing to me? Is he writing to apologize, to ask for forgiveness, or to try to manipulate me? So I read his letter carefully, but quite honestly, I tore it up and I threw it in the bin. He was asking for forgiveness, but forgiveness? Personally, I will never forgive him.
What's your message to Dominique Pelicot, though? If you could speak to him now, what would you say to him?
Why? Pourquoi?
Do you think he'll ever tell you why?
Non, je ne pense pas.
No, I don't think so. I have no doubt he'll die in prison, and rightly so. but I'm convinced that he'll take many of his secrets to the grave.
So much darkness and evil was exposed in this trial. Is there any light that can come from it?
Outside the court, huge crowds of women cried with joy at the announcement of the verdict. It gave immense hope to all women who suffer sexual violence. So we must keep in mind that there was not only bad that came from this, there was also a lot of positivity, and that today, people are free to speak out.
We can talk again to Guto and Kwajo. You heard there David Pelicot saying there is some positivity because of the extraordinary response there from people who went to the trial. And I just feel that there is also some light from how incredible the family has been. From Giselle herself, who waived her right to anonymity, who said shame must change sides, but also from the son, just there, you know, giving an interview, like talking about it, processing it. It's just extraordinary.
It really is. I mean, in that video, you could really hear the hurt, but also anger towards his father, which is completely understandable. And no doubt, just like his mum, he feels a sense of violation, like he's been violated and lied to, which he has. And more extraordinarily, they opened their lives and their family's life up to the world and up to the world's media in order to try and help others and other women out there going through similar. And one of the scary things was that what this raised, especially around the subject of sexual violence, is it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen by a stranger or someone that you've just met, but it can happen in your closest circles. That's the scary part, and it does happen, and we need to be speaking up more about that and also protecting those going through it.
Yeah, it's nearly always someone you know.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
I just think the worst in humanity, you know, for better or worse, brings out the best in humanity. And in the most tragic situations, you find the greatest sort of heroes and heroines. And some of them choose to do that. You think of someone like Mother Teresa working in the slums of Calcutta, or Nelson Mandela in prison. But you look at a family like this and you thought, they didn't want to be heroes. She didn't want to be a heroine. She wanted to live a nice sort of suburban life. And the pain is that clearly, for most of their lives, he was a good husband, they thought, and he was a good dad. It reminds me of this very moving film, The Commandant's Shadow, about the son of the commandant of Auschwitz, who goes to meet a survivor of Auschwitz. And it's an extraordinary relationship between them, because the son, you know, at one level, you know, represents, you know, one of the most evil men in history. And it was nothing to do with him. He never did a thing. He was a little boy and he thought his dad was lovely. And they grew up in a lovely little family home next to a concentration camp where millions and millions of people were sent to their death. And I just don't know how people cope with that level of pain. I just know it's beyond someone like me. And, you know, the family, yet again, have shown themselves to be extraordinarily resilient.
I mean, the way in which Giselle has, like, risen from her own trauma and just pure and absolute evil to go on to help so many others across the world, I think is nothing short of inspiring. And I genuinely do believe she is a hero and should be held in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also to be like by the son as well.
Yeah,
because, you know, obviously not many people or nobody are going to be going through the horror that he's gone through and the world-spinning horror. But there will be kids out there whose parents, perhaps that they love very much or idolised or whatever, have gone on to do bad things. You know, it happens, sadly, quite a lot. And so actually speaking about it is bound to help people in that situation as well.
I think no one can put themselves in his shoes, right? For the majority of us, we see our own parents as idols and heroes. We never, ever imagine that we'd have to pick up the phone and hear what he's had to hear. But again, being able to speak out and try and help others is just absolutely incredible. But I cannot imagine what it's been like for him, for his mum, for his family over the last few years.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Leads to a deep questioning thing of who you are for something you've not done yourself. There you were, living your own life, minding your own business. You thought you came from a highly functioning family where mum and dad loved each other and lived normal lives, and then something like this happens. How do you deal with that? And as you say, at a smaller level, we all parents embarrass their kids a little bit, but, you know,
What do you mean? Surely not.
There are levels. Yeah. There are levels where I just don't know.
Yeah.
It's one of the most difficult things because disowning your own, the people who brought you in to this world, is really hard. Pretending it didn't happen is really hard. It's, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But like you say, on different levels, domestic abuse happens an awful lot, and there's a lot of imperfect parents out there. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. With the Prime Minister out and about today to warn councils they could lose cash for road repairs unless they count every last pothole, we'll discuss why this is an evergreen issue in politics.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll meet the woman who can sniff out Parkinson's as she teams up with researchers to help with early diagnosis of the disease. Also ahead, we'll be discussing the impact of toxic masculinity on boys in school as Sir Keir Starmer rejects calls for a minister for men. And how do we solve the country's pothole problem? All that and much more to come on the UK Tonight at 8.
The Chancellor is looking for ways to promote growth.
Today, I want to talk about economic growth.
What plans will Rachel Reeves forecast for this spring?
Our growth prospects.
And will they bloom?
To British growth for growth, driving economic growth.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Growth is the #1 mission.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling, it's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth, Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the President, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the President might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. I've covered Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent. Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, in these uncertain times, there are some things you can rely on from the great British public. Moaning about the weather, moaning about queuing, moaning about repeats on the BBC, and of course, moaning about potholes. But the Prime Minister tried to adopt a more can-do approach today. He visited mechanics instead to tut over the damage caused to car suspension and promise action to tackle what the government called a pothole plague. Well, potholes have been a plague upon many houses of government. Here's a reminder of the many who have taken the opportunity for a quick pick by the side of the road.
Every Member of Parliament will testify that potholes are high on the public's list of concerns.
So is this pothole?
So this is pothole damage. So you can see the mark there.
Yeah. And then is that usable? Or is that's
no.
done?
Well, this is not a good road for potholes, is it?
Absolutely terrible.
Really, they're right in the middle of the road as well. Sometimes it breaks up on the edge a bit, but it is all right down the centre.
It's actually got progressively worse on the way. We've never looked at it.
Can I just say, potholes is actually a big issue, very serious issue, but the sight of politicians pointing at the potholes as if people couldn't see them for themselves.
I know.
So what kind of damage does this cause on this tyre? It just kills me, the small talk. I'm sorry.
I know.
But, I mean, look, there must be a reason, right, that people are talking about potholes, because I guess it is symbolic of their local areas getting run down, right? What do you think, Guto?
Well, you can tell there's local elections not a million miles away, because that's why suddenly these things matter. They should matter all year round. You know, I cycle around London. If you hit one of those, it really hurts. It can be very dangerous. But like so many things in politics, we focus on them very, very intensely in the short term, then we forget about them, and we don't do what it takes in the long term to improve the situation once and for all. And this is another example where, again, it's dictated by the electoral calendar rather than a long-term determination. Just imagine how popular you'd be if you stood for the mayoralty in one of the great cities of the UK, or, you know, and just said, I will solve this once and for all. I will have a zero tolerance of potholes.
Yeah. What's your take on potholes?
Oh, my God.
You actually feel quite strongly about that,
I do.
Yeah.
It's the absolute bane of my life. I mean, there's been several occasions where I've had to pull over worrying that I've ripped the underside of my car off because I've driven into a pothole. But I think it's the bane of everyone's lives, cyclists, motorcyclists, car drivers. But I think the serious point here is around the health and safety concern and the potential injury that it could cause. I have a friend that was cycling, went into a pothole, ended up breaking his arm. So, I mean, these accidents really do happen, and we've seen that several governments say that they're going to address it and fix it. So I'm glad to see that the government want to do something about it. I just hope that they do.
It's like local government as well, isn't it? Things in your local area that really make a difference to your actual life. Like, I am obsessed, bear with me, with my bin men. I love my bin men. They are amazing. Because I'm the sort of person who always forgets to put my bins out. So I'm like panicking, like rushing out in my pyjamas. And they always go and get them from my little thing. They roll it out. They are brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. And it is these kind of day-to-day services that really impact your life.
And, you know, potholes matter, but I do feel we need a slightly more holistic view of what is it about the local neighbourhood, because I don't like potholes, but I don't like the sort of smell of pot everywhere that I walk near where I live when it's a blatant breach of the law. If people want to legalise it, fine, but currently it's illegal and people smoke it everywhere. I don't like the fact that, you know, both my sons, when they were teenagers, were sort of mugged on the streets of West London. They're not the mean streets of, you know, one of the roughest parts of the UK, but they're still dangerous. There's so much. And yet we sort of talk about them briefly, we sort of flag them up, everybody gets excited, then the elections are over and we forget about them.
There you go. Some important points. Thanks both very much. It's been great to have you on the Politics Hub this evening. That's it from us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow at 7.